So we swapped seats for this podcast.
Yeah.
Because
I'm feeling a bit weird over here.
Well, now because I am going to grill you.
Oh, no.
Not on your personal life and things like that.
Okay.
But on your new book.
Okay. Well, let's do this. So did you read it?
I did. I read it. So like it's really a history. It's obviously focused on the murder of Robbie Lawlor, which was, I think, since the Regency, the biggest gangland story that's come out of this country. But it goes into the history of, I suppose, of organised crime in Dublin. And the title focuses on really the history of double crossing, really. Like why this murder? Obviously because it was, such a high profile case. But what intrigued you about it, I suppose?
Well, from the very beginning, if you recall, it was April 2020.
Yeah.
And we were all sitting at home, locked away.
Yeah.
Very alien from people who'd been working in a busy newsroom and always out and about. And of course, there had been the murder of Keane Mulready Woods in the January of that year, the dismemberment. That was just such an enormous and shocking story.
Yeah.
His legs left in a hold-all bag in Coolock and other body parts found in the back of a burning car. It had become a worldwide story and it was real sort of narco-terrorism, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. I mean, it was. I remember seeing it reported in Mexican newspapers and going, wow, this is really, really, not to state the obvious, absolutely not normal. Yeah. Even in a world of gangland violence where people are killed maybe over drug debts, that level of ferocity and the fact it was inflicted on a child.
17-year-old, yeah. I mean, it was shocking. And I think that, of course, we knew that the chief suspect was Robbie Lawlor. We knew Robbie Lawlor had done it from very early on. But of course, you couldn't translate that to the public. You couldn't say that because he was alive.
Yeah.
And, there was an investigation going on and they needed evidence and there needed to be some evidence or a charge to back up saying that. So, of course, it's, months later and Robbie Lawlor himself is murdered. And I mean, it started the day, it was a Saturday.
Yeah.
And it started with rumours and the phone going and this guy killed up in Belfast in Ardoyne. It might be Robbie Lawlor, it might not. It was very difficult to get absolute confirmation on it.
Yeah, because he was shot in a location that people would not expect him to be in for a start. And
Ardoyne, of course, is a very Republican sort of stronghold of Belfast. I eventually hop in the car. We had been issued with these sort of, passes so as you could travel, because I think actually you could only go a certain distance. So we were essential workers. So I was like, there was two things going on. Obviously, this was a really significant crime story. And secondly, I was really glad to get out of my house, right? I hit the road to Belfast and eventually got up there. And by the time I had got there, it was confirmed it was Robbie Lawlor. And there was all this sort of intrigue around his death. A number of members of the Dundon organisation, Ger Dundon, Levi Killeen, and a guy called Quincy Bramble I hadn't heard of before, were arrested. They were in custody.
Yeah.
Who were the Dundons and how were the Dundons involved in this? Because, of course, Robbie Lawlor was a dead man walking. A lot of people wanted him dead. We knew that he had gone to war with Cornelius Price and the Maguires, who were one of the sides of the Drogheda feud. We knew that he had angered the criminal known as Mr. Big because he had murdered his friend. And there was other people in his past because Robbie Lawlor was a very chaotic character who made so many enemies.
Yeah.
I mean, so it was a fascinating story. And I think from the very beginning, it brought together all sorts of criminal groupings and all sorts of possibilities and this web of sort of intrigue and betrayal.
And kind of how these murders occur, because, we can, when you write about them in the newspaper, it can be, a Hutch gang member was killed by a Kinnan gang member, but often what happens is they're planned, they're executed, and the people that are involved, there's all sorts of other plots going on within the plots, isn't there?
Yeah.
So, I mean, we certainly saw that in many of the murders that are classified as part of the Crumlin feud or the Limerick feud, where although they are connected with that, they're sort of carried out by people for their own personal reasons with grudges. I mean, Robbie Lawlor, as you said, was somebody who picked up enemies like like nobody's business. But I think as well, if you look in the book and you go back to his early life, that you can see, you know, by the time he's a teenager and he's starting to go to prison, at that point he's already effectively one of the most dangerous people in the city and capable of murders, really.
Absolutely. And to sort of understand where he came from and where others came from, I think you have to look at things, including the planning of this city. You know, these big housing estates that were developed on what was once the breadbasket of Dublin, which was once the farmlands. And of course, it was a reaction to the amount of people living in dangerous tenements. And there were a lot of people from the inner city were moved out to these areas. There was promises of it being a very sort of fabulous new lifestyle for kids and all the rest of it. But a couple of waves of heroin came. Yeah. We were in recession. There was a lot of unemployment, a lot of marginalisation, and a lot of bad planning where I think there was promises of various, outdoor facilities, schools, etc. And they didn't follow as quick as the housing came. So you had this kind of...
well, it's that classic mix, isn't it?
Yeah.
That has occurred again and again, not just in Ireland, but across the world, where if you put a large group of people and you don't service them well and look after them, and they're all raising children really at the same time, crime will grow. And obviously Robbie Lawlor grew into adulthood when there was organised crime gangs that really taken a grip in parts of Coolock and in Darndale and around that location.
And it was a job opportunity for many teenagers to go and work for these gangs.
Yeah.
And to work as hitmen.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously there's a finite amount of people who are willing to take up a gun and to kill to earn their living. But there was all sorts of employment opportunities as enforcers, as debt collectors, as runners and all the rest of it. And I suppose he was coming of age at a time when drugs was just exploding.
Yeah.
Drugs were exploding, I suppose.
Yeah.
Criminality was exploding, while areas like Coolock, where he was from, were being forgotten by progress. You had this other situation where employment starts to grow and more money starts flooding into the country and there's more money then for drugs.
Yeah, the shadow economy grows along with the legal economy, I suppose. And if you're coming from a certain part of the, where opportunities are small, the opportunity that does exist is that shadow economy. A lot of people slip into crime, slip into drug dealing, have no appetite or desire to get involved in the violent part of it, may almost be forced to threaten violence because they have no other choice. I mean, Robbie Lawlor certainly seems to be the opposite to that. He seems to have embraced, and he also seems to have this, which is the worst mix, which is that volatile, erratic nature, and also the type that, any sign of people disrespecting him or dismissing him, he seems to have met with inflicting violence on them straight away. I mean, probably the first shooting he's really connected with is the shooting of a guy called Mark Byrne.
Yeah, who's kind of a well-known, an older criminal who he meets in jail. He's falling out with him. And he keeps in touch with people in jail after he's released and finds out when Mark Byrne is coming out in temporary release. And he shoots him dead outside the prison.
Yeah.
And in broad daylight.
Yeah.
On the street. And when he's lying on the ground, he leans in front of passers-by to make sure he's dead.
Yeah.
And like you said, Robbie Lawlor's personality is the most... it's the most dangerous mix because he's been described to me by people who knew him, and he became increasingly impulsive, reckless.
Yeah.
You could never predict what he was going to do.
Yeah.
If he said he was going to kill you, he probably would come and kill you himself.
Yeah.
He wouldn't hire anybody else to do it. He'd do it there and then.
Yeah.
And he's a really dangerous character who has connections with a much more stable kind of character in the organised crime world, a guy called Richie Carberry, who's his brother-in-law. And Richie Carberry is a contemporary, I suppose, of Mr. Big and others. And Carberry moves north to Bettystown. He sees an opportunity in that area of turf, of drug turf. He sees an opportunity in particularly in Drogheda, which had once been controlled by the Maguire faction along with Cornelius Price, who's a sort of a long-term associate of them. Drogheda has grown. It's become one of the biggest commuter towns. Most people in it are working in Dublin, and they go home at the weekends, and many of them take cocaine when they do.
Because the boom of cocaine, of course, cocaine boomed first in Dublin, and during the times of the Celtic Tiger seemed to be everywhere around the city. But it also had a second boom across rural Ireland, which we've all talked about many times. And people just know now that cocaine at one point was, it just wasn't available except for in certain locations. But as the 2000s go on, it becomes a nationwide problem. And therefore these regional drug dealers become more and more important. Robbie Lawlor seems to have tied in with that. Richie Carberry, of course, was a sort of solo operator, really, but he would have been somebody who grew up in the same community as Mr. Big, and they would have known each other at that point.
He's ambitious.
Yeah.
And he moves up to Bettystown and he sees an opportunity in Drogheda because the Maguire faction, who have long held control over the town, have these sort of younger guys who are getting a bit pissed off and they want to go out on their own. And they are ambitious, and they sort of, there's a schism within the Maguire faction, and the younger crew go to war with the older crew for control of the town. And of course, Carberry comes in as their backer.
Yeah.
He's their mentor. He's going to furnish them with weapons and with drugs. And he sort of backs them, And he, of course, has his secret weapon, who's Robbie Lawlor. And Robbie is in and out of prison. He has a set to with Cornelius Price in prison. He gets out and he kind of, comes to work with Richie Carberry while lurching in and out of feuds everywhere.
Yeah.
In that chaotic, impulsive, aggressive, way. But ultimately, when he's in jail... Richie Carberry shot dead. Yeah.
And I mean, one of the reasons, of course, that Robbie Lawlor, there's a couple of reasons why so many people want to kill him. One of them is that he is suspected of being involved in the non-fatal shooting of Owen Maguire, the head of that gang, a shooting that left Owen Maguire permanently paralysed. And Robbie Lawlor is also the chief suspect in the murder of a guy called Ken Finn, who was a very close associate of Mr. Big. What happened because we talk about Owen Maguire maybe being shot by Robbie Lawlor a lot, but the Ken Finn, that betrayal there, if you want.
You see, it's always very, very difficult. So you're kind of trying to apply your knowledge in as much as you can to a situation that happens and try and come up with a sort of a scenario that is most likely. Yeah. So for me, with the Kenneth Finn situation, I think Mr. Big had sort of offered some support to the Maguire Price faction. Yeah. I think that Kenneth Finn was his hitman. Yeah. And he was really good at his job, shall we say. Yeah. And I think Richie Carberry decided to take him out in a kill or get killed scenario. Yeah.
Because Ken Finn, although he wasn't sort of well known in he was responsible for at least one of the most notorious murders in Irish gangland history, which is the murder of Alan Ryan. So a really dangerous guy. But I think he would have been pally with Robbie Lawlor, but...
They'd have known each other, for sure. And yes, the murder of Alan Ryan is really what puts Mr. Big on the map big time as well, isn't it? Because, I mean, he's taken on the dissidents and he doesn't know, are they going to come, are they going to come in full force? And of course they don't. Yeah. And that's a significant moment in organised crime, isn't it? Because, the balance of power is clearly at that moment in the hand of the drug dealers and no longer in the dissidents or the paramilitaries. But that's what I can kind of make out of it. I think they are all operating at that point like they're playing a game of chess. Yeah. So they're trying to work out what the opponent's move is going to be. Yeah. And they're cutting them off at the pass. Yeah. And while that's a very crass way to describe murder, that's what their business is. Yeah. And I think that's why Ken Finn was taken out of the picture, to leave the big organisation, the Price Maguire faction, in a less powerful position. Yeah.
So in the run-up to the weeks or months just before Robbie Lawlor is murdered, what's he doing then? He's certainly under threat, and he's moving around the country. He has a girlfriend which is also another part of the story that's unexpected, I suppose. Tell us what's happening just in the weeks, I suppose, before he gets shot in Belfast.
Yeah, really scary stuff is happening. Obviously, Keane Mulready Woods is murdered. Information comes in very quickly about where that has happened. Crime scene is closed off. This is a huge national story. The Taoiseach, Leo Varadkar at the time, visits Drogheda. This is really significant. This is a town at war. And Robbie Lawlor doesn't go to ground.
Yeah.
He hangs around quite confidently in the town, goes in for a drink, in pubs. He's showing his presence. He then does start to spend more and more time in Belfast, where he's operating as a sort of a drug collector for gangs. And it appears he's also looking to collect money owed to his dead brother-in-law, Richie Carberry, which he believes is owed to him. And he's on social media and he's out and about in the Cathedral Quarter and he's conducting a relationship with a very middle-class businesswoman who is working around the legal profession, shall we say.
Yeah.
A woman who was identified months previous by the Gardaí, who believed that she may be under threat by Lawlor because they witness outside or near a Garda station or a courtroom one day how Lawlor approaches her car and puts a flower into each 4 doors.
Right.
And they worry about this and they have a conversation and they decide they'll approach her and just say to her, look, is everything okay? If you have anything to tell us, you have our full backing here. We're not going to allow you to be intimidated. But of course, when she's told that Lawlor has done this, she giggles and sort of blushes.
Yeah.
And there's a realization that there's a relationship here. There's something going on here. So this woman is actually due to, or certainly the PSNI in the north were told in the aftermath of Robbie Lawlor's death that this woman was due to travel to Belfast with his children to spend some time with him. And so that relationship is going on before the murder of Keane Mulready Woods and after it.
Yeah.
So he is carrying on in a chaotic way to the rest of us, but to him, he doesn't care.
No, he's not one of these guys who seems to be appearing, feeling distress. And he's he's obviously mixed in with all of it's a confusing mix of people that get thrown into the middle of all of this. Because there's obviously the guys up the north who, like, the tradition was that the idea of a Dublin criminal going up to intimidate guys in a Republican area was, I mean, it would have been unheard of, surely, at one point, would it? Most
definitely. And certainly the paramilitaries were in charge.
Yeah.
And I think we've seen over the recent years how really there is no border anymore for any of these gangs. A lot of them are operating cross-border. And they're using one another and working with one another. It doesn't matter what your background is.
Yeah.
I think the days of, being Republican or loyalist are gone, aren't they?
Well, they are, I think, on that level.
Yeah. So Robbie Lawlor is definitely, he's feeling very comfortable up there. He's working with groupings in the north. He is going in to pick up drug debts. He seems to be dealing in cars. It was described to me by somebody who knew Lawlor that it was never clear what his business plan was.
Yeah.
He didn't actually. He was one of those people that seemed to operate day to day.
Yeah.
He never accumulated great wealth. He was very high risk.
Yeah.
He was capable of immense uncontrolled violence.
Yeah.
In the sort of last months of his life and, leading up to those months as well, he was described as having a kind of a tick in his face.
Yeah.
Very shifty. He was using a lot of drugs himself and seemed to have that mix of personality plus uncontrolled emotions that doesn't mix well with drug taking.
Yeah, I think it's funny because he seems to be a really, really reactive person.
Yeah.
And obviously willing to turn to violence really quickly. I mean, if you even look back at one of the first murders he was involved in, Noel Dean's, Noel Dean's had been along with him involved in another shooting, and Noel Dean's had been in a pub and spoke out of turn about his involvement, And he was obviously a friend of Robbie Lawlor's, and Robbie Lawlor shoots him. And that seems to be the modus operandi. You know, if something goes wrong, I'm going to shoot somebody, basically.
Yeah, totally out of control, and no forward thinking.
No.
You just react in that moment. And we have seen other people with similar characters.
100%. I mean, like people like Rue Redmond would be another type. I was going to say
Rue Redmond was another type, and you can see that they're going more and more out of control.
Yeah.
They're probably safest in jail.
Yeah.
For themselves, because they are building up this reputation of being out of control, putting too much heat on anybody they're around, and being too dangerous.
Yeah.
Because they could kill. There's no logic with them.
No, it's all about the next hour.
Yeah.
It's never about, and of course that makes people far more dangerous because they're not considering the consequences. Obviously.
And yet what I found really interesting in the research of this book and, writing it was there was obviously another side to Robbie Lawlor, because he was able to have this romantic side. That he was able to conduct a relationship with somebody completely out of his league and class, really. And he also had a long-term relationship with the mother of his children, Rachel Kerwin. And that was an on-off thing. And I don't think it was always a bed of roses there. No. But he certainly did seem to have an ability to hold down some sort of a relationship despite these impulsivities.
Yeah, and we had, of course, the pictures of him. Where was it?
Palestine,
doing charity work at some point.
Brought football jerseys over for kids and videoed himself while doing that.
Yeah.
But at the same time, there was social media in the run-up to his death as well, where he's out and he's on the gargle or whatever else. He's on the coke probably. And he's videoing himself with, in particular, there was one homeless woman.
Yeah.
And he's really, making fun of her and, knowing the proximity of who she's with, you feel like it's a deeply uncomfortable piece of video, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And he like, I think you say in the book that people could find him charming and good company and funny and lively, but they always knew this could all turn very, very quickly. Even the people that liked him, if you know what I mean.
For sure. So look, he had a very intriguing, in one way, life. He was somewhat typical of those young teenagers who are useful to drug organizations. But his death is the most intriguing of all.
Yeah.
And, what has come out of it, because of course in the north there are people before the courts, and the PSNI during bail hearings have given quite a bit of detail about their investigation. They speak about up to 20 people being involved. They've insisted that because of course they released the members of the Dundon organisation.
Yeah.
That by that evening they were released, and Levi Killeen in particular, unconditionally.
Yeah.
But days later in the south, the Gardaí staged an operation where they caught two associates of the Dundon organisation collecting €50,000 in money from members of the Maguire organisation. During their time in custody, they were asked, was this money payment for Robbie Lawlor's murder? But all the while, the PSNI have insisted that they released them. They were correct to release them. They have had no involvement in the murder, and that evidence points in a different direction to the Dundons having, a part in the murder. Yet you can't ignore the sort of the history of the Dundons in a double cross.
Yeah, because of course Wayne Dundon in particular has been accused of that many times, speaking out of one side of his mouth, and then ordering murders. Obviously, then the other side of what the case the PSNI are going to put across is that there was that there had been this infamous meeting, I suppose, in the Sligo Hotel, and that it is their case, as far as we know, that the murder of Robbie Lawlor was arranged at that point.
Exactly, and that's what case they're going to put before the court. They have said that's where the arrangement was made for his murder. They have said publicly that he was killed by appointment in the house in Etna Drive, and their case will be interesting when it comes up, because of course the big elephant in the room is the fact that on the 4th of April 2020, while none of us knew, the police of Europe were up live on the EncroChat network, and they were listening to everything that was going on. Now, they have taken time in certain cases to connect a handle, because obviously all the EncroChat phone users were operating under a nickname, to connect a handle to that. But surely the secrets and the key and the actual, solving Robbie Lawlor's murder exists within that EncroChat network, you would imagine.
Yeah.
You would believe. The surveillance operation that was launched in the south in the days after Robbie Lawlor's murder, when they were caught red-handed with the, that money, did that come from EncroChat, or was that arranged through prison communication? But one way or another, the phones are key to it. And yet there has been no evidence put before the courts to date that there is anything from EncroChat.
I mean, one of the interesting things about the book is that you sort of start, there's a history of that double crossing. Even the rise of the Maguire Price organisation comes on the back of other double crosses and other murders is it Roy Coddington? So it's Paul Ray, and it just goes on and on and on, doesn't it?
It does.
Like most of these murders, when you read it, and it kind of goes through a history of, I suppose, the major gangland points. Like really, nearly all of them are killed by their former friends, aren't they? Yeah,
they are. And a lot of gangs implode, don't they?
Yeah.
They seem to have this life sort of cycle that, they sort of rise to a bit of power, a bit
take
of money.
Over, rise as young, take over, maybe fill a vacuum that had become.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Make money.
Yeah.
Start becoming a little bit too overambitious.
Yeah.
Maybe start killing a bit.
Yeah.
Concentration on them by the Gardaí, who have resources that are limited.
Yeah.
And then that creates this paranoia.
Yeah.
And they start sort of imploding and killing one another. And within a short space of time, they're gone.
Yeah.
They're a thing of the past. And there's somebody new and ambitious to come in and take over.
Yeah. Which is no doubt happening without us even knowing at this moment.
Yeah.
There are people positioning themselves. I mean, what is the life cycle? What age was Robbie Lawlor when he was killed?
Well, he was in his late 30s, was he?
Late 30s.
Yeah, so it seems to be about 20 years. And the other thing that I find intriguing is, of course, we're covering murders, and there's some of them that are really high profile, and there's some of them that aren't.
No.
Okay? And yet, when you look at them, each murder leaves a mark.
Yeah.
And is like, again, it's like a chess game. And somebody's taken out, and it is an opportunity for somebody else to push forward. And you don't always know that at the time.
Yeah.
It's often in hindsight when you're looking back on a situation and you're sort of putting together this web that you realise, wow, that was really significant. The A meant B happened.
Of course, and even the Robbie Lawlor murder, he was involved in the murder of David Fred Lynch. And some of that came back to haunt him almost 15, 20 years later, didn't it?
Of course, a young associate who sort of vowed to avenge the murder of David Fred Lynch was amongst a young grouping who went up against Robbie Lawlor. If you remember that video as he came out of the gym, the famous gym bag, and he was sort of tackled by these young group who put the video up online, which actually is a direct result. His reaction to that, you talk about overreacting, impulsive reactions, his reaction to that was to kill and dismember Keane Mulready Woods.
And again, all
his
of
gym
that,
bag being taken.
Exactly. And that all begins at this initial double cross, because again, David Fred Lynch would have been somebody who knew Robbie Lawlor socially.
Exactly.
So when is the book? Is it?
The book is out, it's out. And it's on audio.
Did we mention the name of it yet?
Web of Betrayal.
Web of Betrayal.
We'll have to give Clodagh a picture of it so she can put it up.
Yeah.
It's out. It's out there, and sure, look, we'll see how it goes.
Is that? Are you happy it's done? Are you happy you did it?
Always am. I finished it, so you see, you kind of are always working months ahead, and then you have to kind of go back and do a bit of publicity around the book. So it's a little bit, because you're trying to remember exactly what was in them. I I'm not a massive fan of writing books, I have to say. No, I find them difficult to write.
Yeah.
I'm always very glad when they're out, and it is like the delivery of a baby. I mean, when they arrive and they're in a little book and your name is on it, and it looks nice. I know mine aren't very cutesy, my books. They are all about gangland murder and stuff, but you're always sort of on to the next one when you're talking about. There's a long run into the print of it.
Yeah.
And of course, the story of Robbie Lawlor and the trials will be going ahead next year in Belfast, so it'll always be available to update it.
Yeah.
That story just isn't quite finished yet. And it will be very interesting to see what the cases are put and the defence in the courts in the north as regards what happened. There's obviously activity down here, you know, around the Mr. Big organisation and around Barry Young, both of whom have been sort of named in the media as believed to have been the sort of organisers and the directors of this. I don't necessarily totally go with that theory, and I do explain in the book and sort of pull apart why I don't necessarily go with that. But it is an investigation as well as a theory, and there is certainly things happening around that. But it's a tangled web, isn't it?
It is a tangled web, and we've said it before, but it's you know, when you have to simplify these things to put them in articles, but you know, it's just not that simple, is it?
No. Like, what about you in your book? I'm trying to drag a book out of you for ages.
Look, I mean, I should do it because I would like to. Yeah, I would like to do it. I would like to be in the position you're in, though. I don't want to go through the middle.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah. I mean, look, the thing is, you eventually do get to that position. Yeah, but you've written it and you can't sit back because there's always something else.
Yeah.
I mean, this is a relentless hamster wheel we're on.
It is. And it's amazing.
With crime.
Look, and it's amazing. I mean, we're doing more episodes than ever, and never do we get to the position to say we've nothing to talk about?
Absolutely never.
Isn't it incredible?
And like sometimes we're coming down in the lift and like people sort of go, are you going to do podcasts? And we're like, and we're walking in here going, we have to do this, and we can only get out a certain amount because you get tired.
Yeah.
You know, and...
but it is incredible.
It's incredible, the amount.
Yeah. And look, we're in a particular point of an organised crime cycle, which is, as you said, there's a life cycle for sort of ordinary domestic gangs. We're in the life cycle of the Kinahan gang is now coming to an end. There will be other things coming along. Yeah. Some of them we start to see and start to speak about. But yeah, it's incredible that cycle. And you do wonder, people like Robbie Lawlor, like when they're, say he was in prison for a good long period and comes out
in and out,
mid-20s or something.
Yeah.
Does he not think, this is like, I've got maybe another 10 years of this life, maybe I should cop on?
No.
He doesn't.
No, because he lives for the moment, doesn't he? He lives for the day.
Because, I mean, it can't be under any illusions. He must see all of them guys that came before him, that this isn't going to end well. But it doesn't stop him going on like that.
No, and I think most people, things like having kids, getting jobs and stuff like that, they might have fed a wild enough youth. And maybe we all live a bit like that for a particular period of our life. But I think in the ordinary course of events, the evolvement of humanity, things like that ground you and you do kind of calm down a bit.
Yeah, when you hit those mid-20s, things sort of change, don't they?
They do a bit, they certainly do.
Did you ever read A Clockwork Orange, you know, the book?
Well, I've seen the film, but...
So in it, famously, a famous book about extreme violence set in a sort of future or whatever, but one of them, at least, one of the wild characters, he just kind of settles down gradually. Yeah. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But like for some of that does happen to criminals as well.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
It does happen to many of them, that they sort of maybe hit their 30s and they just sort of slow down and move apart from it. But then there's those exceptional guys like Robbie Lawlor. They just don't.
I know, and you wonder with the likes of Lawlor, how do you police somebody like that?
Yeah. I think it has to come to its natural end. You know, I don't think
it almost has to play itself out some way.
Yeah, I don't think the fear of I don't think he could be, locked up, and that would stop him doing it, So look, it's an interesting read.
And we're going to run extracts. Yeah. So we'll be doing that over the next day or so. I was going to say to you, we were only on yesterday about the monk.
Yeah.
You talk about people sort of evolving and changing. What I find interests me in organised crime and gangland is the balance of power.
Yeah.
And I suppose that's in the normal world as well.
Yeah.
Something can happen that can change everything.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, it looks like somebody is on this sort of doomsday route and something shifts the balance of power. And if you look at where Jerry the Monk Hutch is now and where Daniel Kinahan is now, it's like a seesaw, isn't it?
It's like a seesaw. And of course, events happen to them as well, don't they? Like as the famous political, it's events, dear boy, what shapes your political career. So yeah, like, I mean, it certainly, it's a world where everything is extreme.
Yeah.
And there's extreme consequences. But I think with the Robbie Lawlor book, that was the bit I found interesting. It's how the history plays out in the present. And they can't escape from it ever.
No.
Do you know?
Yeah.
You shoot somebody when you're 19, it can come back. It can go back and haunt you again and again and again. And a row in prison can come back to you on the outside 5-6 years later. So yeah, it's
karma, hey?
Karma, hey.
Yeah. Okay, Niall. Oh, you're supposed to say that to me.
Okay, Nicola.
So
thank you very much.
Thank you for having me on.
Oh, I'll think about doing it again maybe someday.
I'm Nicola Tallant and you're watching Crime World, a podcast about criminals, drugs and the underworld in Ireland and across the globe. Make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you can be the first to watch all our latest episodes. You can also listen wherever you get your podcasts.